Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Kilcullen. I am the founder of Exploring the Wonder Years. Today, we're here talking about forgiveness with Pastor Melissa Cortese. Welcome.
It's great to be here with you.
I'm so excited.
I'm nervous, but I'm excited as well.
Yes, I'm glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you have been in your life. Tell us everything.
Tell you everything. Well, I'll keep it short now. I'm married to an amazing husband, Joseph. Him and I co-pastor a church in the Bronx. I am a mother to two incredible young men, Jordan and Donovan. And I don't have any pets. Have served and lived in the Bronx, and also for a good portion of my life, I served as a practitioner in the health field as a physician assistant in hematology and oncology primarily.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm looking forward to getting into both of those areas of being pastor and also your career in medicine. I think our topic today, forgiveness, will really help us. Your experience will really help us understand it better. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your willingness to chat about this topic. I have gotten a lot of no's, so I am excited that you said yes and that you're here today.
Wow.
Thank you, Pastor. One thing I want to add, Pastor Mel is probably one of the most direct, loving people that I know. And so I want all of you to love up on this experience that we're about to have right now. So thank you again. Okay, so how do you define forgiveness?
How do I define forgiveness? For me, it's a conscious, deliberate decision to release whatever feelings I've accumulated and developed of resentment, of vengeance toward a person or a people group that in some way, shape, or form has harmed me. And that forgiveness I offer regardless of whether they actually deserve it. But it also doesn't mean forgetting or condoning or excusing the offenses that, I suffered at the hands of another.
Yes. Thinking about the time that we're in, COVID, and I started to think about this, instead of us thinking about forgiveness toward people, right, toward humans, there are situations that happen in life that forgiveness is also we need to find forgiveness within this season that we're in because of circumstances that are not in our control, like COVID. Can you speak to that when it's really not a person, but it's called a time like a pandemic? It's called COVID. How do we find forgiveness in that?
Well, I think you used a word that's important, and that's control. We, for whatever reason, want to always be in control, not only of others, but also of we need to pause because my son is trying to call me and it's ringing everywhere. Call me, wanting to give me the recipe and not the pie. So, sorry.
I love it. Okay, so we were talking about control or lack of.
Yeah. Or lack of. And so, part of being able to offer forgiveness is to make room. And you make room when you have a certain understanding. And that's why, for me, control, having an understanding that we do not have control is critical and it's important.
Yes.
So I think that's how I have to look at things through those lenses.
Yeah. What is your journey with forgiveness?
A long one. It's interesting. For a season, I was bivocational. And so I served in the church, but I also served in the medical field. And as I transitioned full-time into the church, I think the issue of forgiveness grew. One thing about working in the hospital, to a certain extent, you go in, you do your job, anywhere where you're dealing with people, you're going to have to deal with forgiveness. Anytime you're involved in a relationship, you have to deal with forgiveness. I think the difference in the job is, for whatever reason in our minds, we have this switch. And so when we clock out of work, we clock out of the people that we became involved with, or maybe had issues with, or had confrontations or conflict with. In the church, it's not the same way. You're part of a community that really is a family. And just as in the natural family, right? Mother, father, children, cousins, nieces, nephews, you don't shut those people off, and you don't shut those feelings off. And so as it pertains to whatever conflicts or misunderstandings, again, that happen, because the church is not immune from that. Wherever there's people, again, we're going to encounter those moments. And there's also an expectation that's put on, I believe, leaders within the church, that somehow or another, the same blood that flows through the veins of everyone else does not flow through ours. And so there's a standard and a level of expectation that I believe is placed on us, not fairly. And so it makes, you're constantly finding yourself in positions of forgiveness, because people are always getting offended for one reason or another. It may be that they don't like the message that you're communicating, what you're preaching. In the church, there's always a lot of confrontation, because we're confronting our sin. And so those are difficult topics to navigate. And so my journey of forgiveness is constant, it's ongoing, and it's always present before me.
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I forgot about this piece of when we're living life, I like to call it shoulder to shoulder with people, humans, right? That we have to always remember that humanity. And through my research, my personal research of forgiveness, thinking about when you get to a certain place in your journey with forgiveness, that's where humanity has to, connecting to that other person's humanity. And not to, my mom likes to say, don't point the finger so quick, because you have three pointing right back at you, right? And so really understanding that what connects us is that humanity, and finding compassion is really important. And I heard someone speak recently. I went to a leadership conference over the summer, and thinking about finding forgiveness in the workplace, and how that really can allow the space for people to become creative again, innovative, and get work done if there is forgiveness. And I also love that you highlighted this piece about what we think of our leaders, right? That they should be a certain thing, or we expect something of them, but they too are human, and we're all imperfect. And I think sometimes people leave the church because they expect something of another human being that is not fair. And so,
Yeah,
thank you.
it's impractical, actually.
Yeah. And I think one thing I'll say, I've been thinking a lot about emotions, and really trying to learn more about feelings and emotions, and how they show up, and how they show up in myself, and understand just emotional intelligence. I think that's easily put. And thinking about how that piece of what's coming up for us after you've sat through a service and you've engaged, and there's things that have been said, right? I'm going to say the Holy Spirit will poke at that thing that maybe you've been suppressing for many years. And just, if we were just curious about what is coming up, we would be less offended by what the leader is saying in that moment, and really put the mirror back on us and say, all right, why is this coming up for me right now?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with forgiving yourself. And so anything that brushes up against the possibility of anything that's about me that's amiss, that might be exposed in one way, shape, or another, becomes very offensive to me.
Yes.
Because part of that control that we just talked about a couple of minutes earlier also means wanting to be in control of how you're seen by others.
Yes.
And so pride, ego, all of that just kind of comes crashing all at once. And navigating through that can be very difficult. You know, at that moment, you literally are dealing with a split second of deciding what's more important right now. Becoming a better me or a healthier me, or maintaining this front and this persona that I've spent a lot of time crafting. That's a part of it also.
Yes. The other thing that's coming up for me there is shame. How we walk around with shame, and I think people sometimes mix up shame and guilt. And guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad. And so thinking about how that shows up also in the moment where you're saying like there's this control, this, oh my goodness, they're gonna know that I'm a bad person. What will they think of me? Wow.
Yeah, and shame is also a byproduct of not being able to deal with your own guilt. So it's very, it's almost impossible to not experience one without the other.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we've already started to answer this question, but is forgiveness important? And if your answer is yes, why is it important?
Well, yes, it's definitely important. But the good news about giving forgiveness is that it's not really about the person who hurt you. So forgiveness, it does free the perpetrator, right? Even though they may be unrepentant, they may be in denial, they may be dead. But on a deeper level, the person whom forgiveness frees is yourself. And so when you are able to forgive, you cancel emotional debts and you become free of the past, right? That has transpired. You become free of the bondage of hurtful memories and experiences. You're free of the need for the perpetrator to apologize before we can get on with our lives. And as a result of that, when you think of all the harm that unforgiveness does do and puts on, you're also then now free to love people who are different and more caring than the perpetrator. You know, there's a lot of transference that goes on when we've been hurt, and oftentimes, right, hurt people. And so it doesn't matter whether you're involved or not, others around you and in your space are going to feel the wrath and the ire of how that hurt, affected you. And so, if we hold on to the hurts of others, awaiting some form of justice, we're less able to take in the freedom of our own forgiveness.
Wow, you've said a lot there. I'm wondering what about self-forgiveness? How does it show up? What are the benefits? Are they aligned with what you have shared? The benefits of forgiving self versus forgiving someone else?
Yeah, because it has everything to do with forgiving yourself, right? Loving yourself. Forgiving yourself is about loving yourself. And when we're able to love ourselves, as a church, we went through a beautiful book of the title of the book was the Good and Beautiful God. And so oftentimes getting back to what you're talking about, the guilt and the shame that we bring upon ourselves. And the way it's always interesting to me, we make God who we are. So if we feel a certain way about anything, or we respond and react in ways to experiences or to people, then our thought is that God also reacts in the same way. God thinks the way I do. And that's so far from the truth, right? And so when it comes to forgiving ourselves and loving ourselves, it's really participating, making a decision to engage in being healthy in mind, healthy in spirit, healthy in body, because we don't often realize, or we forget, because I think people probably do know that lack of forgiveness and what that does to you internally, emotionally, and mentally, that it does affect you physically. It's a known fact. And so oftentimes you'll go and you'll get examined by your physician and he'll say, hey, your pressure's a little higher than it's normally. You're not someone where we've, seen this in your routine visits. What's going on in your life? Have you experienced any tragedy? Are you worried about something? What kind of stressors exist in your life? Maybe you need to take a look at those things before we talk about going on medication, because I'm not convinced that you do need medication. So all those things are connected and intertwined. And so the same way that we might commit to going to the gym 3 days a week and getting on that treadmill and, portioning our meals, we have to think about emotionally and psychologically, what have we neglected that is now affecting us physically?
Absolutely. What would you, for someone who is on a forgiveness journey, what would you suggest? What are the steps for doing the work that's required for that healing? What are some tips you can give us?
Well, for me, that's right. How am I fostering forgiveness in my life?
Yeah.
Right. And first, I have to remind myself and um, repeat to myself over and over again that I am committed to treating others with compassion, empathy, and respect. And that is irrespective of everything, race, creed, religion, whatever you have. That list can grow and grow and grow. So that's a commitment that I have to make. Then for me, the first step is acknowledgement. I have to acknowledge what happened. I cannot make that decision or choose to decide that it didn't happen. It happened.
Yeah.
It's okay that it happened. So I have to acknowledge that it happened. When I acknowledge that this offense has taken place, then I also have to allow myself to experience the feelings and emotions that come along with it.
Yes.
So in the same way that I cannot deny or suppress the acknowledgement of the event, I can also not deny or suppress the feelings and the emotions that have resulted, from that offense.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so then what happens? So I've acknowledged it in my mind, in my head.
Mhm.
That's not good to keep it there. I can implode trying to maintain all of these feelings
Mhm.
and remembering these experiences. So I have to communicate. I have to talk about it
Yeah.
with a trusted person, someone that can handle it,
Yes.
and someone that will help me navigate through what those feelings are.
Yeah.
And in communication, I think that the person that I invite into that space, I also have to let them know that I do want to forgive.
Yes. Yes.
Actually saying that is affirming my decision. And I do believe that when we affirm things, that also puts feet to those affirmations. And so we actually now start to do things about it, right? We act. And then, we forgive, right? I state that I don't want to continue carrying that anger. I don't want to continue to carry that hurt, that frustration, that guilt, resentment that comes after, being offended or hurt in any kind of way. And then I've got to let it go.
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest thing to do. But at some point, I have to decide that I'm letting this go.
Yes.
And again, it's not that I'm forgetting. It's not that I'm excusing the perpetrator. But it has everything to understanding that I have to love myself first. Oftentimes I think we say it a lot, but we don't think about what we're saying is that while we're suffering this thing that happened, the perpetrator is living his life like nothing happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like I put myself to be a victim again, but in the second phase of it, or, at this juncture, I'm responsible for that.
Right.
No one around me is, but, I've got an opportunity here. And so that's kind of how I navigate through forgiveness for me personally.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Something that's coming up for me, thinking about that compassion piece. You mentioned affirming that you want this to happen, that you want forgiveness, right? So saying it out loud, having a partner, a accountability partner that you have now said it to, so that person can support you. I like to say living shoulder to shoulder with somebody through their journey. What does it sound like when you are walking through the steps of trying to find forgiveness. Like, what are some words that, or phrases or affirmations that come to your mind that you might be willing to share?
I don't have one-liners, right? And I know we live in a world of one-liners, and there are beautiful adages out there, but it's a thought process, you know. So, in having compassion and empathy for others, and again, when you first feel the brunt of whatever it is that's hurting you, it's difficult. I mean, this is happening in a matter of seconds. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I have to, getting back to humanity, have to remind myself that this person, whatever it is that they've done, comes also from a hurt place.
Yes.
And it's not to give someone a pass on what's been done, but I think that it puts me in a better place to be able to offer forgiveness, because I could be that person to someone else.
So true.
Doing that, you know, doing that same offense, being responsible for an offense or a hurt. Yes. And so I have to ask myself at that moment, well, what do I expect from others towards me? Do I want people to be compassionate, loving, empathetic towards me? So who am I that I'm not going to extend that to someone else?
Yes.
You know, and one of my favorite Bible scriptures, and everyone knows it, is that while I was yet still a sinner, Christ died for me. Mm-hmm. And so because I am a person of faith, that matters.
Yeah.
You know, and so when I was, you know, at the lowest of low, you know, as wretched as I could be, yes. Very far from God, all of that didn't matter to him. Yet he offered me forgiveness.
Yes.
And so in that split second, as I process what's going on, I have to start from there.
Yes.
You know, and if I get an apology, that only becomes a cherry on the cake, but it doesn't become the goal.
Yes. So two things that are coming up for me that I would like for you to talk about. I think people are misconceived by the notion forgive and forget, right? You've mentioned that a couple of times. Can you speak to that, that not forgetting piece, what you think about it, how that, tell us more about that.
I'm a realist. I don't think you can forget, period. So, you know, to even entertain that, I don't think it serves anyone any good, because I really do believe that it's impossible. If it is possible, then it wasn't that big an offense to begin with. That's the, you know, so I think you also have to consider that, you know. And I also have to ask myself, what place was I in at that moment that it became so, you know, whatever it was so explosive and so damaging to me? Did it have more to do with the fact that I was in an unhealthy place, or did it have to do with what was actually done? And so that's why I said I don't have like these one-liners. It's a loaded process, and you know, it starts with making this commitment to work towards forgiveness. You know.
Yeah. So something I'm going to say about that, my son's father and I have done a series on YouTube, co-parenting. And so part of that, our episodes have now come to a pause because we don't remember the offenses that happen. And so honestly, people tune in because they're wanting to know how we work through certain things. My son is going to be 23 next month. And there are moments where, I mean, there are things that, you know, I think we've been transparent about, but there are these other things that it's like, well, how did we deal with that? What did we do when X came up? And, you know, so I turned to my son and I say, Josh, tell us, what did we fight about? Like, what was the stuff that you witnessed? And he said, you all just did those conversations behind closed doors. And I didn't see any of that. And so I don't know what the issues were. And so I said, well, now that doesn't make for good episodes because we can't remember those offenses. But you're bringing up an excellent point that when there's a bigger mission, right, you're adding value to a child's life, those things, those offenses, you got to kind of put them on a scale and say, how important is this to the bigger picture of what's happening in this moment, you know?
Yeah, and as you were talking in terms of parenting and in terms of marriage, I think another decision that has to be made as you live a life of forgiveness is that you choose not to archive.
Yes.
And that's something that, my husband in our early years of marriage struggled with. The first 5 years, there was a mental file cabinet. And every time I was hurt, I was offended, the file would go into the cabinet. And that became my weapon. And so anything that smelled, looked like that hurt, I'd go back into the file cabinet and I'd say, hey, remember when you did this?
Yes.
And so obviously a clear indication that I did not choose to forget. The flip side of that is that there's some things that that you have to remember. It's great that you forgot it and genuinely forgot it, because it probably was something that, again, the result of it was so layered and maybe had less to do with the perpetrator than it did with yourself. But there are things that I need to remember so that it helps me to maintain and carry out whatever disciplines I have established or I am trying to establish by making that decision of, I don't want to go back there again.
Yes.
I, in some way, shape, or form, participated. I may not know right now. And later down the road, I may find out that I had no participation in it. But again, because of my humanity, I may find myself there being the perpetrator. So what did I learn from that experience? So that not only, part of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. So that not only I do no harm to myself, but that I do no harm to others. So in that sense, there is a constructive way of looking at some of these hurts.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe that any hurt that happens in life, God uses it for his bigger purpose in our lives and the lives of others that we live alongside?
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with language, because anyone that doesn't have an understanding will come along and say, oh, so God did that. God allowed that to happen. And then that just leads us into this horrible path of, again, determining that God is like us. So, or God is an angry God. God is a damning God. God is, this mean ogre who just looms over us, waiting to punish us. So we got to be careful with how we, but because of who Christ is, I believe that every situation can be redeemed. And so I choose to look at that. I look at it through those lenses, as opposed to, because I find that language can get me into trouble in people who don't have an understanding. That's the way they respond.
Yes. Another question based on something that you've said, this idea of apologizing. And so you also have a program at your church on Fridays, right? At church,
Mm-hmm.
our church, on Fridays, that it's New Beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
And they walk through the steps of 12-step programming. Step 4 is really taking this inventory. Then the next step is to find forgiveness or contact or be in touch with the people that we may have hurt. Then there's this clause that says, if it is not going to help that other person, we should not reach out to that other person. So can you speak to this idea of apologizing and how that resonates with you?
Well, I believe in those steps. They make sense to me, especially as it pertains to what I've mentioned in terms of the Hippocratic Oath, to do no harm. There is a level of acceptance also that needs to happen. I have to accept that this may not be able to happen for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes it's a safety issue.
Yes.
And so it's not the right thing or the appropriate thing to do. That does not mean that forgiveness hasn't taken place. I think that oftentimes in our life, as we deal with these situations, and as we deal with our Christianity, we have this check the box kind of approach. And so we lay out the boxes and we check them off and we think we've done our duty. Now it's really done. And it's like, no, that's not how we should approach these situations. And so, I think that's where the problem lies in with that. We have to almost walk away from that type of a mentality and understand that, yes, forgiveness can take place. It does happen, even if you are not given the opportunity or have the opportunity to hear or to say, I'm sorry,
Yes.
for what has happened.
So something that's coming up for me that I think it's important, you mentioned earlier, thinking about hermeneutics. What does that mean? How does it show up in the world today? Why is it important for people? Do you believe it's important for people to understand what hermeneutics is, so there isn't this misunderstanding of what is being said in the word, and it connects to what you have shared about God is like us, right?
Right. Language. We have to understand as well that while the Bible is timeless, a lot of what we're reading was written within a time, within a culture, within political constraints. I mean, there was so much going on. And if you don't take time to understand those things, then it will be misleading as you go and you read. Context is everything. And oftentimes I find, especially within the Christian community, people like to pluck verses out of their context because they like what that one verse says. Control. This one sentence fits my narrative. This one sentence fits what's good for me. And so we use it as weapons in those moments. And so that's why hermeneutics is important, because people will throw out verses left and right and they're pulling them out of context and it doesn't even mean or apply to what they want it to apply to mean.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I think we've talked about, actually, let's talk about this one last question. I think you've answered it in many ways, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you would share. So how do you foster forgiveness in your daily life? How is this a daily occurrence?
Yeah, I think it falls under everything that I've shared kind of throughout our time together. But at first, definitely, I just want to re-emphasize this commitment to loving my neighbor as myself, and to be reminded daily that I have been forgiven of much. And so that is something that I am to extend to others, and that I have to pause, within these moments. And again, this all happens in a matter of seconds. Oftentimes, you don't know it's coming, you don't see it's coming, you get slammed. And then once you've been slammed, you can pause because event has already taken place, right? You can't do anything about it. That's the not having the control. It happened. Now that it's happened, what do? Now you really are in control. You are in control of what happens, how you manage your emotions, and how you imagine the action that you will take next.
Yeah.
So committing to loving your neighbor, those that you're in that space with, as you love yourself. And then now I think a responsible person pauses and takes time to consider what's happened, to manage their own emotions.
Yes.
Before, right, as a parent, I remember my mother-in-law, she never reprimanded or spanked her children immediately after the event took place. She had this way of, and she shared the story oftentimes, time to go to bed right after event occurred. And the kids would go to sleep saying, oh, wow, we just got away with something. Cool. We're not getting punished. Following morning, they would awake to these amazing aromas. She was cooking up a spread like you would not believe. Pancakes, bacon, sausage, eggs. wow, mom really forgot. After everybody's tummies were full, meet me in the room. And the wrath came down. But she understood that how she needed to discipline her children was not going to be best when she was still overwhelmed with whatever hurt, disappointment, anger. That wasn't going to benefit the situation. And so she needed to go to bed. She needed to have a good breakfast. No reason why, you don't stop tending to your family.
Right.
But now what I have to say, I will communicate well. And the justice that needs to be served will be the appropriate one.
I love that. I love that. That's powerful. That is powerful. Cook a good breakfast before you beat your children.
Before you reprimand your children, not beat, reprimand.
Only kidding. Only kidding. So I think the last thing that I want for us to say is thinking about the greatest commandment. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And I know you and I off camera have talked about this many, many times. Is there anything, I think the part that I'll be transparent about is the part that I have often left off is the as yourself. And you've mentioned self-love and you've mentioned self-compassion being really, really important for forgiveness. At the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. Love yourself and be compassionate with yourself. Thinking about this commandment specifically, anything you want to highlight there or anything to share about it?
Getting back to James Bryan Smith, who has written some great books. And I always mess this line up, but the gist of it, right, is that we are people in whom Christ dwells. And that's like so overwhelming to me. I mean, if I don't, Christ loves me so much that he chose to dwell in me and to somehow or another decide that I'm good enough to participate in his kingdom, that I'm good enough to be his child, that I'm good enough to be the incarnational presence of who he is in loving, serving others. And that's like, whoa, okay. So if he thinks that way about me, I need to start thinking about myself in that way. The way that God loves me, I need to love myself. And so, yeah, we are one in whom Christ dwells. That's a big deal. Start acting like it.
Yeah. That identity piece, I think, in our society is really something to consider. It's something to define what that truly means. And I think as a Christian and a believer in God and a higher power, this idea of what you just shared is really powerful. Starting there, if you believe that there is a higher power, start with what the higher power he says you are, and then accept, because that was another word that you used a number of times today. Accept it, and then everything else will be able to fall in line.
Yeah, especially also when you recognize that also applies to your perpetrator. And so in that also helps to open the floodgate for forgiveness.
Yes.
Because it just doesn't apply to you, but it applies to them as well.
Yes. Wow. Pastor Mel.
Yes.
Where can people find you? How can they be in touch with you if they have questions?
If anyone has questions there, feel free to call the church office. I'm there Tuesday through Friday. And we receive calls from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. in the afternoon. And I love chatting with people. And so, yes, they can feel free to call during those hours, during those days.
Excellent. That's Crossroads Tabernacle in the Boogie Down Bronx.
The Boogie Down Bronx, yes. Best place to be.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Say it loud for the people in the back.
Yes, and in the front.
Pastor Mel, I love you. Thank you so much for being here. For the viewers, feel free to reach out. You can find me on my website, exploringthewonderyears.com, and also on Instagram at Danielle K. Kilcullen. And so thank you, Pastor Mel. I appreciate you. This has been amazing. Better than I could have even imagined or planned. God is truly present.
Well, you're too kind. This has been a blast for me. So thank you for trusting me to engage with you and for sharing this time with you and your viewers.
Yes, thanks so much.
Have a good day.
You too.